Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 21 of GT Masters, the review series for Gran Turismo's various race cars within the GT kind of category, various subcategories within there. And occasionally on Gran Turismo, more and more so recently in fact, you get what we call PD originals, or Polyphony Digital originals. And basically that's a fancy way of saying made up. These are cars which are on the game but don't actually exist in real life. Not so much the Vision GT cars, they don't really fall under that category, although some of them are fictional. These are vehicles which tend to be more racing vehicles, and they're usually inspired by real race cars, but they're not representations of the actual race cars. So they're visually similar, but they're made up by the staff and crew of Polyphony Digital, and this is one of those cars. There are quite a few of them on the game. There's ones based on the Golf, the NSX, the GTR, loads of them from loads of different manufacturers. This particular model is the Acura NSX Polyphony Digital Original Racing version. And one of the advantages that a PD original race car usually has, in more cases than not at least, is a price advantage. Because of the fact that the car technically isn't real and doesn't really have any historical significance or fan base associated with it, they charge far less for the car, because it's in effect like a base model almost. This car is a perfect example of that. It's essentially very similar to a toned down version of a Super GT NSX. Now it's not based on a Super GT NSX, it's based more on the GT1 spec NSX, but it has performance and handling which is kind of like a toned down JGTC spec or JPGT spec NSX. The handling though, interestingly, and this may be to do with having less power to deal with, but perhaps not, it is also significantly lighter than the Super GT NSXs, but the handling I would say is far better on this car. In fact, it's not even in the same league as the Super GT models. The Super GT NSXs, as I discussed in my Tour of Japan series for all of the Super GT cars in the game, have quite tricky handling. They almost feel as though they are steering from the centre of the car, like the steering more pivots rather than turns. It's almost sometimes like driving a forklift truck rather than a race car. This car though has much more conventional handling, and it's all the better for it as far as I'm concerned. The handling is really good. The fact that it has less power to deal with and also a lower weight than those cars means that it's very, very beginner friendly as far as race cars go, especially rear-wheel drive race cars, because obviously all-wheel drive and front-wheel drive race cars are much more forgiving naturally, whereas rear-wheel drive, especially mid-engine rear-wheel drive, can be a little bit more professional inclined, a little bit more difficult for novices on the game to get a hang of. With this car though, that is certainly not the case. Now, as I mentioned earlier, often with these cars the price is a lot cheaper, and that is the case with this car. 205,000 credits is a lot cheaper than any of the GT500 spec NSXs, up to and of course including the Stealth model, which is well over 1 million credits. So, being 205,000 credits, or roughly 4 or 5 times cheaper, is it 4 or 5 times worse? Well, consider the spec. It's powered by a 3-litre engine. It puts out a lot less power than those cars. Those NSXs put out around 800 to 900 horsepower typically. This car puts out 436, so roughly half the power of many of them. It also puts out just under 300 foot-pounds of torque, which isn't overly surprising for a VTEC engine. They don't typically go for torque. And as I said, it is a lot lighter, around, say, 50 to 100 kilos lighter than most, if not all, of the Super GT NSXs at 1,045 kilos. So yes, it does have significantly less power, but it also has significantly less weight. It puts out 417 horsepower per tonne, because even though it doesn't have a huge amount of power, the weight isn't that much more than a tonne, so that works to the car's advantage. And the PP is also pretty reasonable. Very reasonable, in fact. 537 is a very low PP for what is a definite race car. This isn't just a road-going NSX with a big wing and some stickers. It is an authentic Gran Turismo 6 race car. It can race with real race cars, and in some cases beat them with the right driver and on the right track. 537 pp maximum also means that this car is potentially far more usable. Now, the NSX's pp is always quite high given its power, because of how good the NSX is. In particular, my personal favourite NSX on the game is the Type R road car, which is an absolutely phenomenal performance machine that has around 484 horsepower, and it can get around the Nürburgring like a supercar. This race car isn't necessarily quite that good because it doesn't have the top-end performance and it's not quite as powerful, ironically enough, but it's still a very, very good car. For 205,000 credits, it would be very difficult, to be honest, for it to be a bad car. The top speed is no way near the pace of the road-going NSX. The road-going NSXs can easily exceed 220, in some cases 230, and even close to 240 in the case of the Type R, and also the racing models. This car struggles once it gets around 180. It can do more, but it's not really that kind of car. It's more of a grip and circuit-based tune, more inclined towards handling and very twisty circuits. And for that, it is very good. It has a very good flow to the handling, and although the Acura or Acura NSXs don't feel quite as pure as the JDM spec versions, they do still feel very good. The handling is still essentially the same vehicle, just with some slightly toned down elements to it. It's still an excellent car. The only disadvantage I would say to this car, or the only main disadvantage, is that because it has less power, its range of effectiveness is a little bit more limited than some. But for lower PP racing, it's actually a really good race car. It's a lot more affordable, and you can get a much lower power out of it than a Super GT machine. They can't achieve anywhere near as low a PP as this car, which can work to your advantage. But that's it for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.